story from the Talmud. Every day, Hillel would go to work and earn half a dinar. Half of that would go for his food and family, while the other half he would give to the guard at the Beit Midrash. One day, he earned no money, and the guard at the Beit Midrash would not permit him to enter. Hillel climbed up on the roof and listened down through the skylight so that he could hear the words of the living God from the mouths of Shmaya and Avtalion. It was Erev Shabbat in the middle of winter, and the snow began to fall. When the dawn rose, Shmaya said, "Brother Avtalion, every day this house is light, and today it is dark. Is it a cloudy day?" They looked up and saw the figure of a man on the skylight. They went up and they found Hillel covered with 3 cubits of snow. They took him down, they bathed him, placed him in front of the fire, saying, "This man deserves to have us violate Shabbat on his behalf." This is the humble origin story outlined in the Babylonian Talmud of perhaps the most venerated rabbi of all time, Hillel HaZaken, Hillel the Elder, the one whose academy inspired the bulk of halakha and practice to this day, the man who managed to get Jewish college student organizations across America named for him without donating a dime. He got his start not in the Beit Midrash, but on it, straining to hear through the skylight. Long before he was a great rabbi, he was an eager student who one day couldn't afford to pay the entrance fee to the Beit Midrash. So like something out of Looney Tunes, he manages to get himself stuck under several feet of snow, face pressed against the skylight, and from these humble beginnings, this young man ascends to become Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin. Commenting on this parable, the Netziv, the 19th century dean of the Volozhin Yeshiva, invokes the famous line from Devarim that incidentally we read in Shul this past Shabbat, "Lo bashamayim hi velo me'ever layam." It is not in heaven, nor is it across the sea. He explains it is referring to one being discouraged from acquiring a deep understanding of the Torah due to its difficulty to comprehend and its great holiness. God, therefore, says the Netziv, states that it is within our grasp, for if you apply great toil and study in order to acquire various forms of knowledge and skills and analysis, you will achieve it. How many Jewish parents have told their children, if you work hard enough, if you set your mind to it, you can accomplish anything? This meritocratic value is woven into the very fabric of our Jewish tradition. We democratize Torah, making it a thing within our grasp, and through it we democratize divine access. We were reformers long before the Reform movement, long before the Reformation. We, the people of the book, are meant to read the book and the commentary on the commentary and add our own commentary too. And so the story goes, if you think you're too poor or too rich and busy with your business affairs, or too vain to learn Torah, the Talmud offers each person, each of these categories, a role model. Hillel mechayev et ha'aniim. Hillel obligates the poor. Rabbi Eliezer ben Charsum mechayev et ha'ashirim. Rabbi Eliezer ben Charsum obligates the rich. Yosef mechayev et ha'rishaim. And Joseph, who was plenty handsome and didn't allow his beauty to prevent him from making righteous choices, obligates the wicked. And this meritocratic Jewish story maps well onto a similar American story, one in which immigrants tell their children, as many of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents did, to just learn the language, work hard, get an education. Do that, they said, and you'll go far. But today I want to question this myth of meritocracy, because it's not the whole story, not the whole Jewish story, not the whole American story. At the conclusion of Heidi Schreck's remarkable What the Constitution Means to Me, the playwright, a middle-aged white woman, and a young African-American student debate the salvageability of the U.S. Constitution itself. One party argues the document with further amendments and a more equitable application of the rule of law can be saved. The other party argues that it cannot. The audience is left to decide, and the correct choice at the conclusion of Shrek's heartwarming and heartbreaking tale, I must confess, is not so clear. The through line of her play, the conundrum of liberal democracies, is also the subject of Adam Gopnik's 1,000 Small Sanities, his new treatise on liberalism. Now, to be clear, liberalism is not about a particular political party, and Gopnik spends much of the book defending attacks on it from the right and from the left. Liberal democracy is a system of government, ostensibly our own, in which progressives and conservatives participate. That doesn't mean that most conservatives call themselves liberals, but it does mean that in the classical sense, what distinguishes liberal democracies from despotism is not the fact of elections, even fair ones. No, it is the extent to which they avoid what de Tocqueville, Mill, and others understand as a tyranny of the majority. Gopnik defends liberalism this way. See if you hear echoes of basic Jewish values in his words. A hatred of cruelty, a belief in radical change through practical measures, a readiness to act non-violently but visibly, and sometimes in the face of threatened violence on behalf of equality. A belief that life should be fair, or fairer, or as fair as seems fair. People's lives should not be overdetermined by who their parents were, or how much money they've inherited, or what shade of skin their genes have woven. We know the mantra. Work hard and you can succeed no matter what your station and background. But hopefully we also know that simply isn't the case. The zip code where you were born is as good an indicator of any and better than most in determining how likely you are to amass wealth, to obtain a passport, to receive a college education, even to live a long life. So much of what Americans achieve is tied to their circumstances, their race or gender or sexual orientation, and in fact there is an emerging consensus in liberal circles about privilege, whether male privilege, Christian privilege, white skin privilege, hetero or cisgender privilege, the privilege of an able body, and so on. More and more of us recognize that our life's achievements, hard-won though so many of them were also brought about by luck of who we are, where and to whom we were born. Faced with the enormity of these structural and institutional inequities, it's tempting to lift up and support extreme positions. And there are those voices throughout Jewish history and literature. But while radical positions have merit, they warrant consideration and stimulate real discussion about issues beyond the facile or superficial, revolution rarely succeeds. And usually in the end, it does more harm than good. The liberal would claim, says Gopnik, that lasting positive change is mostly achieved incrementally. He calls liberals radicals of the real. The Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, tells of two rabbis who once walked through the dark Arbel Valley in the eastern Galilee. Looking up, they saw the very first rays of dawn. Rabbi Chia said, "This is how Israel's redemption will look. First, it will be little by little, but as it continues, it will grow in momentum." Modern Hasidim like Chabad, for example, proclaim, "We want Mashiach now." Normative rabbinic Judaism suggests, "We want Mashiach later." Not a great rallying call, I'll admit, but more pragmatic when it comes to doing the steadfast and often thankless work of pressing communities and societies toward justice and greater equity. The other problem with meritocracy is it foregrounds what we achieve at the expense of how we did so. Too often, we worship the politics of getting things done. And it's the rare politician, I think, who does what he or she knows is right over that which is expedient, or who sees beyond the quid pro quo. But Rosh Hashanah, by the way, I wrote this before the recent revelations, I want to be clear. But Rosh Hashanah isn't about what we achieve, it's about how we behave. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah are the factors that ma'avirin et roa hagzera. They temper the severity of the decree, enabling us to inscribe ourselves in the book of life. There's no al-chet for the sin of earning too little money or even not knowing enough Torah. But greed, abuse, neglect, condescension, gossip, cynicism, they all make the list. There's an aphorism attributed to Robespierre, but best delivered by Jack Nicholson. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. In 1994, just a few years before his death, Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher and political theorist, clearly with this sentiment in mind, delivered what he called a short credo to the University of Toronto. It was read on his behalf and then published 20 years later in the New York Review of Books under the title A Message to the 21st Century. Many of the sins of Berlin's own generation, he felt, could be traced in some way to the advent of Marxist ideology. He wrote, "They were, in my view, not caused by the ordinary negative human sentiments, as Spinoza called them, fear, greed, tribal hatreds, jealousy, love of power, though of course these have played their wicked part. They have been caused in our time by ideas, or rather by one particular idea. It is paradoxical that Karl Marx, who played down the importance of ideas in comparison with impersonal, social, and economic forces, should by his writings have caused the transformation of the 20th century, both in the direction of what he wanted and by reaction against it." The German poet Heine, in one of his famous writings, told us not to underestimate the quiet philosopher sitting in his study. If Kant had not undone theology, he declared, Robespierre might not have cut off the head of the King of France. And then he goes on to disentangle Marxism or any fundamentalism, left or right, from liberalism. "Let me explain," he said. "If you are truly convinced that there is some solution to all human problems, that one can conceive an ideal society which men can reach if only they do what is necessary to attain it, then you and your followers must believe that no price can be too high to pay in order to open the gates of such a paradise. Men have always craved for liberty, security, equality, happiness, justice, knowledge, and so on, but complete liberty is not compatible with complete equality. If men were wholly free, the wolves would be free to eat the sheep." The solution, argues Berlin, is what we call liberal democracy. We must weigh and measure, bargain, compromise, and prevent the crushing of one life form by its rivals. "I know only too well that this is not a flag," he says, "under which idealistic and enthusiastic young men and women may wish to march. It seems too tame, too reasonable, too bourgeois. It does not engage the generous emotions. But you must believe me, one cannot have everything one wants, not only in practice, but even in theory. The denial of this, the search for a single overarching ideal, because it is the one and only true one for humanity, invariably leads to coercion, and then to destruction, blood. Eggs are broken, but the omelet is not in sight. There is only an infinite number of eggs, human lives ready for the breaking, and in the end, the passionate idealists forget the omelet and just go on breaking eggs." The point this Rosh Hashanah I'm trying to make is that we need to stop lifting up exclusively, or even first and foremost, those stories of exceptionalism, of poor students on roofs who become Hillels. And we need to stop pretending that every student can become a Hillel. Most, try as they might, through no fault of their own, will not. What we need is to stop charging everyone the same for access to the Beit Midrash. And we need to stop assuming that because certain people succeed, it is because they were the most worthy. Dr. Evan Parker does analytics about law firm hires the way that Jonah Hill's character selected baseball players in the movie Moneyball. Who's seen Moneyball? Remember his character? The wonky analyst. Parker has a fascinating observation, with apologies to the lawyers in the room. If a law firm's goal is to hire the very best lawyer for their firm, even the ones they call rainmakers, they should give zero consideration to where she or he went to law school. The top 14, argues Parker, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, etc., expensive to attend, and the prime indicator of which attorneys are most likely to get hired by top firms, shouldn't be. Quite simply, they don't necessarily produce better lawyers. And that's before you get, says author Malcolm Gladwell, to the somewhat arbitrary metrics of the LSAT, which largely tests for speed over deep analytical thought, and for which the most successful students can afford to pay large sums of money for preparatory classes. Yet, the best firms do hire from the top schools, and Supreme Court justices tap these students for clerkships. And the whole system reinforces this presumably meritocratic ideal, which is less about merit and more about who you know and how privileged you are. Some have called this the Meritocracy, because how you get ahead is so often connected to who you know. And who we know is based on something hardwired into our brains, something social scientists call salience. We humans are favorably inclined toward those with whom we have the most in common, racially, geographically, gender-wise, and so on. What then might be the liberal democratic solution to the myth of meritocracy? Well, there are structural solutions to be sure, because these are structural challenges. And perhaps that's a sermon for another day, and it's worth delving into some of those structural solutions and trying to better understand the structural challenges. But since it's Rosh Hashanah, and at this moment, at least, I think most of us are focused on our own personal journeys and our family journeys and our communal journeys, let's focus for a moment on interpersonal solutions. And liberal democratic societies, I would suggest to you, ask that institutions and individuals walk a common path. So let's ask ourselves, how might we use salience, privilege, power, and access for good? The answer is some version of tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, to live a life of sufficient integrity. So we are rodfei tzedek, we are pursuers of justice. And that when opportunities present themselves to do right, we are mensch enough to do so. One final story to illustrate my point. The Chafetz Chaim, a venerated 19th century sage, was once asked to appear in court as a character witness for one of his students who had been accused of spying by the Tsarist police. The story goes that before he summoned the rabbi to the witness stand, the lawyer approached the judge and said, "Your Honor, the rabbi who is about to testify has an impeccable reputation among his fellow Jews. They tell a story that one day he came home and saw a thief rummaging through his living room. The frightened thief climbed out of a window and ran off with some of the rabbi's possessions. And the rabbi ran after him, shouting, 'I declare all of my property ownerless,' so that the thief would not be liable for a crime." The judge looked at the lawyer with suspicion in his eyes. "Do you believe that that story really happened?" "I don't know, Your Honor," the lawyer replied, "but they don't tell stories like that about you and me." Shana Tova.